Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. And we're here today to meet David Allen Martin II, right? He is one of
That's
the
correct.
speakers for Poliglotar 2021. And now we're going to know him a little better. So, David, where are you from and what have you studied in your life?
Good evening, everyone. And first of all, thank you to Giuliano for having me on, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I am a translator and language coach. I've been working as a translator for about 15 years now. I actually got into translation not because I originally studied it. I originally studied German and linguistics at university, but because I really enjoyed the process of translation, and I was just recommended by my studies director in Göttingen to the Law and Economics Department at the University of Göttingen. And they hit me hard with some really, really heady texts, but I really got into it and then later went on to study it. And yeah, I've been learning languages since I was about 16. That's not true. I've been learning languages properly since I was about 16. I actually got started studying languages. Well, I don't know if you guys know how it is, but in the States, you unfortunately don't have too many opportunities to study languages earlier on, unless you happen to be at a school that offers that. So I didn't actually get to start studying languages till I was 12. I was in middle school and I started learning Spanish. And it was all grammar based and a lot of exercises, a lot of rote memorization. So I quit after a year. And then I had French the next year after that. And I quit that too, because it was the same thing. And then I got started studying German. And I had the good fortune that my teacher was, I would say, rather innovative for the time, in that we did a lot of stuff that was very much media based. We watched movies, we listened to the songs. I don't know if a lot of people don't know, but the Beatles actually recorded a bunch of songs in German. They actually sang the songs in German. They had a massive German speaking audience. And we would read books that we had already read in English. So we had this kind of access to the meaning behind what it is that we were learning. And that really, really got me, interested in learning German, which later went on to be what I studied and then turned into my profession, both as a translator and as a language coach.
Okay, so the first language you loved learning was German, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And then you came back to Spanish and French, or which other languages did you learn afterwards now properly?
Yeah, after I realized that you learn a language by listening to the language, especially by listening to and reading the authentic language, I had initial success learning German. I came back to Spanish. I moved to Spain. When would that have been? That would have been in 2007. And I worked as an English teacher. I taught English, business English, but also, let's just say, everyday English, colloquial English at International House, which is a chain. It's kind of like English First, if you've ever heard of that before. And later on, I went on to study French and Dutch and Portuguese and Chinese and lots of other languages.
So do you
It
speak
became
all those languages fluently?
not equally well. No, I speak German at a near native level, Spanish at a C1 level, maybe approaching the C2 level now. I would say I speak Mandarin at probably now it's a B1/B2 level, just because I don't get to speak it as much anymore. And then I speak reasonably well in French and Italian. I get by in Portuguese, and my Dutch is pretty good.
That's great. And I have a question for you, since you are American, and people always say that Americans don't like to learn languages,
Yeah.
or they think that they don't need because everyone else speaks English. What do you
Yeah.
have to say about that, about Americans learning other languages? Or are we wrong when we think that?
Well, I've been surprised many times in more recent years, because I think that that's changing. Obviously, there are a lot of Spanish speakers in the States, but there are many speakers of many languages. And I think because of the exposure that we have, especially thanks to platforms like Netflix, YouTube, the fact that you can just kind of jump on any one of these platforms and immediately consume media in foreign languages, I think it's becoming more common. It's perhaps not as common for a European, but I have been surprised by some Americans with some pretty amazing language skills. But when I was growing up, you're absolutely right. I grew up in a monolingual household. None of my family spoke any foreign languages, nor did my grandparents. And so I didn't have any role models in that regard. There were definitely languages that were spoken around me in the community, but I didn't have anybody who, knew more than one language.
Okay, so you are what we can call an exception in the United States, but now you are not an exception anymore because there are more of you.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, I try to act as a role model, and I think that one of the biggest problems is simply the kind of lack of access to good role models, and knowing that knowing other languages is in fact important. That if you truly want to understand someone, then you need to at least understand their language to a certain extent. I had conversations when I lived in China with people who didn't know any other language but Mandarin Chinese. And if I hadn't spoken their language, I never would have heard their story. They told amazing stories, from their childhood and things like that. And that, to me, is at the core of what it means to enjoy a language, or why we should learn languages, to hear people's stories.
Where have you lived and for how long?
I've lived in Germany for more than 10 years now. Spain for 2 years, 1 year in Valladolid and another year in Santander, which is on the northern coast, in Cantabria. And I lived in China and Beijing for 1 year.
Okay, and what are you going to talk about at Poliglotar?
So at Poliglotar, I'm going to talk about my language learning method, which is the result of many years of learning languages, but also working as a translator and realizing that translation is really at the core, at least initially, of learning a foreign language, because we as adults, it's slightly different with kids, but we as adults, we're very, very set in our ways in terms of our native language. We think in our native language, we use our native language in our daily lives, and it's very much an instinctive thing. We don't have to think about it. But unfortunately, the way that most people learn foreign languages, the language doesn't end up being instinctive, but rather it ends up being something they have to try to produce, to reproduce. So the method, the T3 method, in a first step, and obviously this is on the Poliglotar website in the summary that I wrote, it first, through your language, helps you to understand the foreign language, not just at the idiomatic level, so not just the intention of what the text is trying to say, the speaker's trying to say, or the writer, but the true intention, and then also at the word level. So not only do I understand what the person's saying, but how they're saying it. I can give you a great example. In German, there's an expression which means like, now it's getting serious, or now it really counts. Let's just say you're in a competition and you've done a couple of warm-up runs, and now you're going to do the real race, right? The expression is, jetzt geht es um die Wurst. Jetzt geht es um die Wurst. Literally, that means now goes it around the sausage. Right? It's a really funny expression, and it's used constantly. But if I only ever know that jetzt geht es um die Wurst, that means, well, now it counts, right? I don't really understand what is being said. I understand the intention, but I don't understand what it means. But if I'm told what it actually means, literally, then it's much easier for me to internalize it and then turn around and reproduce it. And that's really at the core of what Translation Cubed is. It's helping you to immediately understand at multiple levels and then turn right around and reproduce what you just heard faithfully in the grammar of the foreign language.
Okay, so some people say that we should not translate when we are learning and that we should only have classes in that language. So you're saying
Yeah.
something completely opposite to that, right?
I'm absolutely saying something completely opposite to that. I believe that using this method, so I have a very specific set of steps, which I have included in my, I have a free German course that I started to offer in January of this year. It's primarily geared towards Spanish speakers, but you can also do it in English. And in fact, a lot of the content is also in Portuguese, now that I think about it, in the free course. And so in the course and in my YouTube videos, I explain the use of the method. When you combine the texts that I create, the transition cube texts, or T3 texts as I call them, which are these bilingual texts, with listening and very specific steps, you'll find that you can, within a matter of 10 to 20 minutes, depending on the length of the text, go from listening and not understanding anything to understanding everything. That's the first step. So combining auditory input with visual input in both languages allows you to take an advanced text, or at least an intermediate text, as a complete beginner and go from not understanding listening to understanding almost everything.
But then when you understand things, of course, that the class would go to conversations where you don't do translations anymore, right? Yeah.
That's correct. At some point, you move to conversation. You can't really you can to a certain extent. So one thing that I utilize in my coaching when I coach people, and I think personally that the best language learning coach is one who speaks your language. Because if your coach understands your language, not only does your coach understand when you don't understand, your coach can pose targeted questions to ensure that you're understanding. But let's just say for me, when I teach English, for example, to German speakers, because I speak German, I know what mistakes German speakers generally make. So after they've got the input, now we're working on the output. I'll give you an example. In a number of languages, not just German, Russian, Polish, Dutch, you have something that's called syllable final devoicing. Syllable final devoicing, or Auslautverhärtung in German. What that means is that consonants at the end of a syllable become voiceless. So there is, for example, no distinction, or rather Germans do not distinguish between bed and bet, bad and bat. They said all of them sound like bit, right? So those are four distinct words in English, and any native English speaker or anyone who has a high level of English, if I said any one of those words in a vacuum with no context, they would be able to pick out the difference. But your average German speaker cannot, and not just German, but also Polish, Russian, Dutch, as I said, cannot hear the difference because they don't distinguish. And when in German, for example, a word ends in a voice consonant, it becomes voiceless. So knowing that as the coach, I can call my students' attention to that, and then we can focus on that to very quickly improve their pronunciation. If I don't speak their language, I can't possibly know that. Unless, obviously, I've been working with Germans for long enough. And in that case, perhaps I know that, but I don't know it from the perspective of actually speaking their language, which makes a big, big difference.
Okay, so let's see if someone here has questions. I think you were talking Robson's language with all those terms in linguistics and phonetics.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that. So I was enjoying.
My pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
let's see
mean,
if-
what you brought about, the phonetics part of it, and how important it is to know your coaches or your students' language in order to help them out with like pronunciation from like a cross linguistics perspective, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, what I also find is that almost any student of any language can benefit from a direct phonetic and phonological comparison between their language and the language that they're learning. You know, it generally only takes me one session with somebody to massively improve their pronunciation, because things like, for example, in Spanish, when you have an intervocalic D, so a D between two vowels, it tends to become an eth. So you have something like cambiado, right? So, but English speakers and German speakers tend to say a D as a D. They see a D and they say a D, so they cambiado, right? And it just doesn't sound very nice. But then you tell them one time, well, if a D is between two vowels, it's more like a the in English. Cambiado, wow, all of a sudden it makes a massive change, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But the problem is like, remember, like eventually, right?
You mean remembering to do that?
Yeah, eventually. Yeah, because because I work with pronunciation instruction myself, and it works. Of course, I'm biased, but I tell you that it works. You're a linguist as well, so you know what I'm talking about. But sometimes it takes time. For example, I'm learning Japanese now. For example, the pitch is something that I know how it works, but I do not always do. I mean, the distinctive pitch, since you know a little bit before we were talking about like Asian languages, right? And Japanese, it's kind of controversial, but it's considered like a tone language, not as tonal as Mandarin Chinese, but it's still tonal, or pitch accent, as they say.
Pitch accent,
right? Yeah. And Japanese have like pitch like all over the language, and you have the distinctive pitch as well in words such as like candy and rain. I don't know if you know any like Japanese. So you have the word like ame, but if you say something like ame, so I think you're saying rain, but if you say ame, you're saying candy, right? It's a very light tone.
What about it's raining candies?
It's raining candies.
Yeah, so sometimes depending on if you change the pitch, you'll end up like saying that. Of course, the Japanese will get it from the context, but it will sound like that, from the pitch.
Yeah, I have studied Japanese to a certain extent, but at this point, it's all passive knowledge. I know a lot about the phonetics and phonology of Japanese. I know a fair bit about the structure, the grammar, but as far as nailing anything down like the pitch accent, I simply haven't had enough exposure. I'm aware of the challenge of getting the pitch accent down, but I'm just not familiar enough with it to say anything I think worthwhile, worth listening to about the language.
Much less it's raining candies. Okay.
Much less it's raining candies. But
I'm probably saying that like all the time.
Yeah, but so a lot of what I teach is memory, as you said. So learning is kind of pointless without memory. If you don't have a method, and everybody has their own. Hopefully, they have some way of reviewing what it is that they learn and not forgetting. But unfortunately, most students don't. That is to say that the great majority of students who I start working with, they don't actually have any idea how to review, and if they do review, it generally tends to be in a kind of
random way.
Random way. Thank you very much, Julian. Exactly. It tends to be pretty random. So, part of the core of what I teach and what we do especially in the Linguathor T3 Academy, which is the academy that I founded a few months ago with my business partners, is primarily focused on teaching Spanish speakers German. And we will be offering more languages, but we focus a lot on first helping people to understand how the brain works, and especially how to understand how language is acquired, not learned, and then how you can actually strengthen let's just say the synaptic response, such that language becomes instinctive, as I was saying earlier. So in one of my Instagram posts, I talked about a book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Have you guys ever heard of that book before?
No.
Well, he talks about, in this book, he talks about two different systems. There's two different systems which we use to function in our everyday lives. One system is instinctive. It's things that we do automatically. One of those things is obviously using our native languages in everyday life. And the other one is the system that we need when we do anything that involves analysis. And unfortunately, the way that most people learn foreign languages ends up in analytical ability and not in instinctive ability.
Mhm.
And so there are very, very specific ways in which you can practice, especially practicing conversations, that will lead to this more instinctive ability. And one of the best ways, and this is something that we include in our courses, but I'll also be talking about it more in my talk in November, is using questions and answers. So stimulus and response pairs. So training people's ability to hear a question, immediately understand it, and then respond to it.
Okay, so I would like to know if people have some questions here to ask. If you are curious about some things, let me then stop the interpretation. So maybe the interpreters have some questions. I'm going to end it now. Okay. Michael, Sido, if you have questions. No questions. Okay.
Okay, I think I'm gonna ask one then.
Sure.
I'll
Yeah,
I'll try to break the silence a little bit, and yeah, more that I've been doing. But okay, about learning related languages, David, based on your experience and your expertise as well, since you're a linguist, and I like to hear like your perspective. How helpful or not helpful do you think it is to learn like related languages, like at the beginning of like the learning process, for instance, like Spanish and Italian or Japanese and Mandarin, because it didn't go well for me.
With which languages?
These both pairs, because I had an experience in 4. But yeah, the latest one was like I had like 2 years of Japanese, and then I tried like Mandarin for a semester. And sometimes the instructor would write the characters on the board, even though he was teaching us like the Chinese reading, the Mandarin Chinese reading. I would go for the Japanese because it would be like like more automatic. So it's crazy. It's crazy. Even though the languages they are totally different, from let's say a phonetic point of view, but the like writing system similarity puzzled my brain a little bit when I had to read like Chinese characters, because I would want to read Japanese because of my
so some characters were the same, but the words were different.
Many of them, you can understand what the sentence is like sometimes, but the reading, and I got confused. It didn't help much. But let's hear what David has to say about that.
You were learning those languages concurrently then? Japanese and Mandarin.
For one semester,
For one semester, okay. But that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when you first start, it's very, very common for students who have a beginner level in multiple foreign languages to mix those, even when they're unrelated. So I distinctly remember when I first started learning Chinese that I would want to say something and I would start to say something in French, even though I wanted to speak Chinese, and it was because my French was at a very similar level. It was a beginner level. And so this goes back to what I was just talking about with these two different systems. Your brain, and they've actually done studies, there have been instances in which people actually had an accident and their brain was damaged, and they were no longer able to speak their native language, but they were still able to speak a foreign language, which they had reached a certain level of proficiency in, but they had never reached a native level of proficiency. And the reason is because it was actually located in another part of the brain. So the faster these connections, or rather the better these connections become, the faster the synaptic response, the closer it starts to become to being something like native. And I think that that's the reason why you were mixing them up, because it's kind of all thrown into the same place in your brain. Today, I'm going to work on this language, tomorrow on that one, or I work on this one in the morning and that one in the evening. And your brain doesn't really get a chance to process that information and internalize it at a deep level. But so why is it that you were mixing up Spanish and Italian, though? is
Spanish and Italian, because of like typological similarity. The languages are
okay.
really like close. And I had already like studied Spanish for like 2 years, and then I started Italian, and
Okay.
then
Mhm.
I stopped like using Spanish. That I use it only for reading, and because I think my Italian is much better. So every time I try to speak Spanish, I would speak it with an Italian accent and with Italian words.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
that language was kind of like dormant in my brain. Let's put it this
Okay.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with Japanese and Mandarin was a little bit different, I think. But
Uh-huh.
still, it puzzles me because I was not starting like both like at the very same time. Like I had like some previous like experience. Like I was getting to a low intermediate level in Japanese, but Mandarin was still like difficult. Yeah. I mean, disentangling both languages was difficult, but that was not the reason why I put like Mandarin Chinese studies on hold. It was just because I think it's like too much. Those languages, because of typical typological differences, they take a lot of time and effort. I mean, the amount of hours that you have to put into learning a non-related language from your native or the languages that you are proficient in. Is a lot. And I'm not saying only about Asian languages. I studied Finnish for like 7 years as well, and I had the same difficulty. Like lexical retention, for example, is something that you have to see a word like
far more times.
I would say even like 8 more times. 6, 8, depending on the word.
Are you familiar with the categorization based on the Foreign Service Institute? The different language level categories and the number of hours that are needed in order to learn them.
I saw that table once, I think.
FSI, definitely
I saw it in passing as well.
Okay, yeah.
But
so
I'm
Chinese and Japanese
from,
are
like,
both
my own
level
experience.
4 languages. Yeah.
And sometimes I'm just wondering if people who are learning these languages are having like the same troubles, or maybe I'm not smart enough. I'm just trying.
No, I don't
No, I think
believe
you
that.
are.
I don't believe that at all. It has exactly to do with what you just said, is that the dissimilarity to your own native language makes it such that not just at the morphological level, not just the lexical level, but also at the phonological and phonetic level, mean that you need far more exposures to an individual word or structure before you can internalize it. Absolutely.
We have a question here from David Gurrea Salas. I don't know where he's from. Please,
he's
David.
from Spain. Yeah.
Good evening, and thanks a lot for the inspiring talk, David. I would like to ask you, especially this aspect about the phonological, because when I began, I am a native speaker of Spanish and Catalan. I began to learn German as an adolescent, and what they did, for example, the sound age is the same way in Spanish from Spain and in Swiss German. And first they let us speak it like this ha, till we manage to speak it like this ha or he, no, like the word I, like ich, to say ich, to say ich. So there was like a process to get us, how to say, accompanied or to get us adapted to the new phonological form that was like the standard German one. And that would be my question, like how you deal, because you were telling, okay, with the background of speakers from your native language or from this other language, how you deal them with the phonological challenges of this language. That will be the first question. And the second one, I have to confess, I am using your methods to learn a related language, Portuguese. And especially I am using it, especially for this translation of the writing forms, especially for songs or for small texts. And I would like to know which competence do you think by related languages? You were talking now that your Dutch is getting much faster, better. Like which competence you are like trying to refer with your native level of German language? Because in my case, it's almost the writing competence, the one I'm performing it better with this method. Thank you.
Okay, so just so I understand, you're saying that you are finding this that your writing is improving as a result of using translation cubed. You're translating forward and back, but you're not sure to what extent you can improve your speaking or how.
Exactly.
I see. Okay. Well, in terms of your first question, whenever I start working with a student, usually I don't start working with people complete from scratch, so they already have a little bit of knowledge of the foreign language.
So no beginners, please.
Complete beginners. And it makes a lot of sense. You know, they see something. So I'll give you an example. I distinctly remember when I first got started teaching English, I was working with kids and adults when I lived in Spain, and I wrote a word on the board before I actually said the word out loud, and the word was stomach ache. And I said, how do you pronounce this word? And all of the kids said estomachache. Estomachache. Why? Because stomachache, right? That's what it looks like, and then because they just add the e to the front, right? Any word that ends in s or begins in st. And so right away they had ingrained that pronunciation, and I actually had to work in order to get it right back out of their heads again. So the problem is that when we are exposed to the written word first, before we're exposed to the spoken language, we have the tendency to immediately make an association from the phonetic and phonological perspective of our own language, and then we kind of ingrain that right away, and that has to then be undone. So your teachers, your Swiss German teachers, by recognizing that you as a Spanish teacher would be more likely to, when you see ich, because you don't have that sound, the sh sound in Spanish, although you do have it in Chilean Spanish. I actually did a video about this on Instagram. They do say gente. They don't say gente, they say gente. But because you have this similar sound, the which is called an Achlaut in German, as you know, starting with that and saying ich, because that's also how they say it in Switzerland, right? And then gradually transitioning into would be considered the standard form, I think is a great method, because your teacher, your instructor is taking something that you're familiar with, and then gradually exposing you and getting you to adapt, especially physically, because it's not easy to create a sound that doesn't exist in your language. I think they did a great job there, and that's exactly the approach that I would take as well. I would try to find something that's similar. For example, in English, we have that sound in the word hue, for example, as in color, hue, or the name Hugh, like Hugh Grant or whatever, right? But most people don't actively know that because we don't have a letter for it. And then to get to your second question, yes, T3 can be used to improve both your writing and your speaking. In terms of improving your speaking, one of the most important ways to utilize it is in combination with listening. So you said you're using songs. So you actually create the T3 translations yourself, right? The idiomatic translation and the literal translation. And then do you turn right back around and back translate your literal translation into the foreign language? Do you do that orally?
How different it is from the original one.
Okay, and do you do it out loud, or do you only do it by hand?
Just by hand at the moment. So it's possible also to make up, like, speaking it out.
Absolutely, and that's in fact how it's designed. It's actually meant to be done orally, and one of the best ways that you can kind of do that, for every single phrase that you have, even if it's a song, try to come up with a sentence. I was talking about this earlier, stimulus and response. I know you're a psychologist, right? So you know about this. Create a stimulus environment that elicits that response. Okay, and try to do that for every single one of those. And then what you do is you can record yourself posing the question, the stimulus, and then try to immediately give the response, but do it orally. Initially, you can look at the active reverse translation, right? The back translation, the cues, and then try to gradually transition to doing it without the text. Right? At the beginning, you'll have to keep looking back, but eventually you'll be able to do it automatically. And that's where the real fluency comes from. that would be my suggestion as to how you could do about doing that. Does that answer your questions?
Yeah, perfect. That will boost a lot my synapses as you told. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure, David. Good seeing you. Yeah.
That's great. So I think we don't have more questions from the audience, and this was a very long interview already. So
I
thank
have
you
no
very
idea
much.
what time it is. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, David. And we'll see each other in 1 month and 1 week. Okay.
Exactly. Thank you, John. Thanks, Robson, and thank you to all the translators, the interpreters. Happy Translation Day to everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, the Happy Translation Day, by the way.
Yeah.
I almost forget about that.
All right. Take care, you guys. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Talk soon.
All right. All right. Bye-bye.